You, Sam. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for coming out today. It's great to see so many familiar names in the the participants list today, even though I can't see faces. I'm delighted to serve as the moderator for today's discussion featuring Hamilton Studios Archive and Collection in Mumbai, India. Joining me for today's event, as Sam mentioned, are Ajita Madhavji, who is director of Hamilton Studios, custodian of the collection that we'll be discussing, and also one of the principal investigators or leads for the EAP and MEAP projects that have supported the digitization of the Hamilton Studios collection. Ben Kyneswood, who is Associate Professor of Digital Heritage and Culture at Coventry University and is also a Principal Investigator for the EAP and MEAP projects, will also be joining the conversation, discussing some of the work that he and the team have done to support digitizing the collection. And we'll also have comments from John Falconer, who, as Sam mentioned, is a researcher and scholar of Asian photography, arts, and archaeology, and before his retirement was lead curator for visual arts at the British Library, where he managed collections related to Asian art and photography, and also curated a number of exhibits related to those collections across his career. Before we begin the discussion, and at the start of the discussion, each of our participants will provide maybe 10 or so minutes of introductory comments, sort of explaining their roles and connections with the collections and with the digitization projects. And then we'll have some questions from me and some discussion among the panelists before we open things up to questions and answers from the audience. And also, just as a brief sort of housekeeping note, please use the Q&A feature in the Zoom program to submit your questions. We do have Petra, who is managing those questions, and will answer ones that she's able to answer or save ones that she is unable to answer for that discussion part at the end of the event. But before we dive into the discussion, I wanted to provide just a brief introduction to both of the programs, the Modern Endangered Archives Program, MEAP as we call it, and the Endangered Archives Program, or EAP as we call it. As Sam mentioned, both of these programs are funded by Arcadia. We're both grateful for that funding and for the support that Arcadia provides for these programs, and join together in these programs by a similar mission and a similar format that allows us to fund comparable collections and projects across our two programs. So the Modern Endangered Archives Program, for those who are not familiar with it already, is a granting program at the University of California, Los Angeles Library. MEAP provides grants to preserve cultural heritage collections from around the world that are at risk of loss due to environmental conditions, political uncertainty, inherently unstable media, inappropriate or inadequate storage, climate change, or social strife. The EAP is a similar project in that it facilitates the digitization of archives from around the world that are in danger of destruction, neglect, or physical deterioration, with a focus on materials from any time before the middle of the 20th century. So the EAP focuses on materials before the middle of the 20th century. MEAP focuses on 20th and 21st century materials with a focus on collections that have materials from 1950 onwards. The collections that EAP works with include written, pictorial, or audio formats like manuscripts, rare printed books, documents, newspapers, periodicals, photographs, and sound recordings. The EAP has also supported the digitization of parts of the Hamilton Studios collection, as has the MEAP. Both EAP and MEAP offer multiple types of grants to support this work. The Modern Endangered Archives Program offers 3 types of grants, beginning with planning grants to survey or inventory collections, project grants to digitize a collection, and regional grants to digitize multiple collections that have a shared theme or topic or origin. All of these projects are post-custodial in nature, meaning the collections never leave the home country. And they are supported and led by community members and collection custodians, and they are undergirded by a commitment to making the materials freely and openly available and accessible online. The EAP offers a similar slate of grants to support their projects, including pilot projects, which are designed to survey a collection or to digitize a small collection, major projects designed to digitize and catalog a collection or collections, and area projects to digitize collections on a larger scale. Again, all of these projects are supported by a commitment to keeping the collections in the country, to supporting local partners in digitizing and describing the collections, and working to expand access to collection materials, and to expand local capabilities to preserve and digitize collections. MEAP is a much younger program, and to date we have provided funding to support 171 projects in 64 countries, resulting in the completion of 41 survey projects and the digitization of over 110,000 digital objects. Similarly, over the course of the past 20 years, the EAP has supported over 500 projects and has supported the digitization of over 16 million objects. So there's an interactive map on the EAP website that you can explore to understand more about where these collections and where the projects are coming from. The collections that result from these projects, both those supported by MEAP and those supported by EAP, live on our different digital repositories. So for MEAP projects, our collections go to the UCLA Digital Library Collection site, which is available at digital.library.ucla.edu. And for EAP, the collections and materials go to the EAP repository, which is available at eap.bl.uk/search. Because the Hamilton Studios collection spans the 20th century, digitization of this collection has received support from both EAP and MEAP. But rather than listening to me talk about this collection and the work that has been done to digitize and document it, I'm going to hand things over to folks who are much closer to the collection, who have a much better familiarity with it, and who have been much more closely involved in the work, which means I'm going to stop the screen share here. And I'm going to invite our first speaker to join in the conversation. As I mentioned before, each of our panelists will offer about 10 to 12 minutes of remarks from their perspectives. And then I have a few questions in store for all of them, just to keep the conversation going. And then we'll have time for questions from the audience at the end. And again, please use that Q&A feature in the webinar to submit your questions. And with that, I will hand it over to Ajita.
Let me first say hello to all of you. So it's a good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So it's very, very, very nice of you to have brought all this together on this platform. Now, it's 6 lakh negatives and positives that we have. And I'm to encapsulate all those things in just 6 minutes. But I'll do it. I'll do it. Now, the thing is that in those days, that is 1928, we were born somewhere in 1921 at Simla, which very few people know. We had a small office there at the Simla Mall. And thereafter, then there were lots of photographs that were taken by Sir Victor Sassoon as a hobby. He was a hobbyist. And so then he brought this here to Hamilton House in Mumbai, which is now also Hamilton House. And we had our office there for quite some time, till 1928, when this building was built under the name of E.T. Sassoon Building. And this building, he had his registered office. And this Hamilton studio was his hobby. So he had opened up this studio just as a hobbyist. But at that time, we were very, very premature, I would say, in how to put up the negatives and how to number them and what to do. So some of the negatives were not numbered at all. But thereafter, they followed a system which we follow up to date. We have not changed anything. Because when my father took on, Mr. Ajita Madhavji, when he took on the place, he was told by Sir Victor Sassoon to keep things as they were, which he did. Of course, we had to innovate. He had to do a few innovations. He was a legendary photographer in portraiture, very talented person, born in 1928, started with a Brownie camera, And he did the Gwalior family, Maharajas of the Gwalior family. And that was the first brownie picture he took. Now, can you imagine a young person going there with a brownie camera, which was gifted by his mother to him? And probably he was in shorts at that time. And that was his hobby then. And he came here, and then he was gifted this place by his mother, seeing what he was doing, even though he was talented, he was a talented musician. He played the harmonica, he played the jaltarang, he had given recitals in jaltarang and in tabla. But even so, and he was a cloth merchant, but he left all that on one side and he came to Hamilton. And when he entered Hamilton, he says, "Oh, this is a beautiful place." And that's where it all started. Then he was the official photographer by the government of India. And he was the official photographer for Gujarat and Bombay State. It was then called that. And it was, he would be traveling and going, taking pictures. And his first print that he did himself was 22 feet by about 4 feet, which is really a challenge in those days. Today, you can do a lot of things, but in those days, I know how he did it. Because when he told me, I had, oh my, it was something great. And the studio room was changed into a dark room. So he has done all sorts of juggleries. He had the cream of society come to him. We had the doyens of the royal family come to him, the Maharajas, the Maharanis, the lords, the ladies, all of them. And his first photograph was that of Dr. Ambedkar, who is the architect of our Indian Constitution. Now, he happened to take that photograph as a trial, and that turned out to be a hit. It is in all the government offices hung up there, and every time I see it, I'm proud to say, that's my father. So this is how he came in. And when he came in, it was something wonderful because then he was, at that time, we were using different cameras. We were using different films. The films then used were the Kodak safety film, and then the Plus X and Tri-X and Super X. Then the Kodak color LS, L and S. One was outdoor, the other was indoor. And then, of course, the last we used was Vericolor L, which even I have used. And so we had more celluloid negative films. We had glass negatives. We had different kind of texture to work with and different types of papers that we worked with. So we worked with the Agfa Gewert papers, the Eastman Kodak, Velox paper, if I mistake not, and the Ilford Plastica bromide. Romesco was his favorite paper. And I used to do the developing also. So I did the Romesco developing once, and I was thrilled because it was the hydroquinone developer that I had used from the normal D163, if I mistake not. That was the developer that I had used. And, to make that developer and to use it was something fantastic. So that is how, my father took on this thing. And doing this, we used it in the past, there were advertisements that were there that were being used. Then there were test prints were there, which were in the, and every print that we took out or every print that was printed, if it was not good, it was not given to the client. It was taken as a reject. So if a layperson saw it, he'd say, but that's fine. But for us, it was not fine. So even if it meant some kind of an expense, it was okay. as long as the client gets the best quality, which we even do today. So we have continued certain things, uh, as per my father's wishes, as per the wishes of Sir Victor Sassoon, this has been carried on. And of course, we also look at people who come in who may not be able to afford this kind of luxury, I would say, at some point, but we would see to it that we would accommodate them. So there are many such things that we were doing at that time, where all the judicial luminaries, all the industrialists like the Tatas, the Birlas, they all came to us. And, it was like, we have to go to Hamilton. We need a certain preparation. Every photograph, even today, takes about 45 minutes to take the picture, and an appointment that needs to be done. And I always tell them, and we always sought that they should not be under the makeup or any other mask, because the inner you has to come out and reflect on your face. And that is what the person loves to see. So it's generally the person who is projected that way. We even had the Grand Duke of Russia come in, and he came in very casually. And I didn't know who he was. So he introduced himself. He says he wanted a picture taken. And of course, I did it. And then he was sitting in a certain poise. And I asked him, I generally ask a few questions to know what the person is. And so I asked him, may I ask you what profession you were in? And he says, I'm a public figure. And so from there, I had to make out what he could be. So questioning him further, there were no replies. He just kept saying he was a public figure. And well, okay. So I took a picture that way. And when I asked him for a print, he looked at Lord Willingdon print, which was around on one of the tables. And he says, I want to print just like that. So there was an emblem on that print, and there was Lord Willingdon written there with the year when he came in and when he left. So I knew that there was something different about this person. And then the person who had brought him in was an evangelist. And so I asked him as to, well, who is this person? And he says, Ajita, deliver the print, then I'll tell you. I said, no, you tell me now. And he says, no, I won't tell you. And that went on for some time. And then eventually I said, okay, let him get the emblem. And then he says, oh, but how did you do this? And so the emblem was sent from there, which was very hazy. So I drew the emblem, I painted it, and I resent it. And he says, come to Brussels. Don't stay there. So that was how it was. And of course, that became another feather in our cap. So that is when my father said, yes, now I can trust you with the studio. So it was my exam, which I had passed. So that was the first time that this happened. And with this, I would like to say that, yes, we are going to keep carrying on this kind of work. And of course, now opening up with a gallery, with the first exhibition that I will be putting up soon. So let's hope things work out. That's how it is. Is there anything I have missed out? Please let me know. I can put that in.
Yeah, we do have some pictures from the space, but maybe we can save those for the discussion part. And I'll ask Ben to come in and say a little bit about what has been like working with this collection and trying to introduce other people to this collection, which has such a storied and amazing history to it.
Yeah, okay. So thanks for letting me have the chance to talk about Hamilton Studio. I'm quite the advocate for it. I came across it in 2017. It was introduced to me by a mutual friend of Ajita and I called Michael Cutts. Michael was part of the team that put on Focus Mumbai, which is a photography festival. I had been working in Coventry on a collection of photographs taken by a Gujarati photographer called Maganbhai Patel, who's better known as Masterji. He opened a photographic studio in Coventry in 1952. So it's one of the earliest photographic studios by a migrant. And a lot of his work was very candid. So people were a lot more relaxed in his studio than they were in the white-owned studios that were also around the town. We helped digitize Master G's work, and that went into exhibition in Coventry, and we were asked to send that to Mumbai, Focus Mumbai. It also went to New York subsequently. So we went to Mumbai. We had a lovely time there. The exhibition was fantastic. It was at the Akara Art Gallery, which is in Colaba, right in the centre. And we had long conversations with the people who were putting on this exhibition. And Michael in particular was keen for me to meet Ajita, principally because I was most interested in historic photography, because that was my background. I was particularly interested in how these photographs represented a time and an era. And being able to sit and have a chat with Ajita to talk about how I can help, how we can start getting that story out, was really the start of a relationship that keeps going on today, thanks to not just EAP but MEAP, and hopefully beyond as we move into the 1970s and the 1980s in your collection. The content is extraordinary. It really is. As Ajit said, it really does showcase high society. The EAP collection really shows the end of the British colonial era. So lots of Marcel wave haircuts, lots of rah-rah girls, lots of wonderful portraiture, lots of depth of focus, very filmic type photography. And as we move up towards partition and beyond, it becomes less about formal portraiture, still there, still lots of wedding photographs, family photographs, a lot more passport photography, a lot more people showing that they're moving around, a lot of business photography, some big businesses mentioned, so Mercedes, Benz, Firestone Tires are ones that I found in the MEAP stuff. It really does begin to show us what that era of society was like in that time. And although Bombay was a distance away from some of the conflict that was happening further in the north, it really shows us another side to partition, how business was still trying to get on, and the Indians were beginning to start to look at how they can create a new country together. And some of those people who were hoping to perhaps take over a business, start a business, get a name, get a street named after themselves, they were coming into the studios and getting their portrait taken. I occasionally get people emailing me, having found the content on the British Library website, seeking access to Ajita because they want access to something that has that's related to their family, that's perhaps related to a business that they had a link to or a family member had a link to. I'm happy to pass those on. Jodie Butterworth at the British Library likewise has had similar inquiries, and we've always passed those on. Our ambition is really, I guess, to move beyond what you see and the metadata that we have, which is a good metadata. You know, it's names, it's dates, it's places, it's business names. But we'd like really to be able to connect these to people today. I think that would be our long-term ambition. How can we get people to realize that their heritage is right here? At the moment, we do that through working with young people. They are the interns that come in that we pay to do the work. My role really has been to train them, to support them. I support them. We're over WhatsApp. We sometimes we can have a good hour while we're trying to sort something out with Lightroom that we use to manage the digital files. So we have quite a bit of time looking at Lightroom over WhatsApp. I go through the metadata that they produce, making sure that English is correct, because obviously English isn't their first language. Making sure that spellings are correct, double checking things like English pronunciation, English names that are written cursively on invoices that perhaps people mistake, perhaps mistaking a 5 for an S or an I for an R, something like that. So I go through checking those sorts of things. And that's quite intensive work, actually. You know, I'm going through a spreadsheet at the moment that will have 10,635 individual items mentioned on it. So it's quite a bit of work. But these young people are learning to care for their cultural heritage, and they're beginning to learn the value of the Hamilton studio, and hopefully they'll recognize that there are other studios around India that are in a similar situation that also need care. I should say as well that we've worked with the National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad. They've provided interns in the past. Their lecturers, as well as their PhD students, take an interest in Hamilton as a project, you know, as a set of data to be explored. And that sort of thing is always invited to get the story out there. And yeah, we're very keen, as I said, to start thinking about how we can connect the diasporic Indian community across the world to this wonderful, wonderful collection.
Thank you. I have some follow-up questions about that metadata piece because it's no easy work.
No.
What your team is doing to turn the handwritten information into digital information. But I'm going to save those questions for later, and I'm going to hand things over to John now, who's going to offer some additional comments and reflections on photography and collections from his perspective. And John, shall I bring up your
Yes,
slides?
yes, do please. Yeah, yeah.
All right.
Do I operate them or?
You can just tell me when to move to the next one.
Okay. I should say at the beginning, I sort of come to this fascinated but completely unqualified, since my field is really 19th century photography. But I have to say, I've been having many hours of browsing these collections, and it's utterly fascinating. So I'm just going to say a very few words and look at one or two things. I bring up this view of the Kodak premises in Mumbai, just to stress that as the 20th century turns, one gets much more amateur photography. And so the sort of nature of photography is changing to a degree from the great 19th century photographers. If we could just see the next two slides very quickly, which I only put in because they just give a fascinating picture of early photographic work in Mumbai. And the next one shows, sorry, one before, I think. The next one shows sort of films being processed, which might have some similarities with the Hamilton studio, sorry. And if we could come to the next one now, which is a Hamilton photograph, which I'm sure Ajita will recognize, is the Maharaja of Gwalior and his wife and young child in 1943, I think, which I came across in a private collection. And I include it here because it shows you something of the elegance of Hamilton's production. These photographs were enclosed in an elegant folder with the penciled signature of the studio at the bottom, very much in the style of metropolitan studios in Europe and America. So they were right up to the mark. I think it's worth showing these images because fascinating as the negatives are, sometimes their condition doesn't do them full justice. So to see the final product as it was and as it was sold is perhaps interesting. And these images of Gwalior and his wife, who changes into several costumes in the course of the session, give you some indication of how fashionable it was. This is 1943, and in fact, the negatives for this print I did track down in the EAP collection, so the negatives are there. And I would say I started off looking at the California collections, and I sort of came into it at the second half of at the second chapter, as it were, But I would encourage anyone who's looking at the studio as a whole to look at both the British Library and the California collections, because you get the whole curve of a studio from its beginnings, its development, through to not its end, because of course it's still going, but you see developments in studio lighting, in costume, in the way people are photographed, which is truly fascinating in terms of how working studios were operating at that time. The other thing which I found really interesting was the fact that the invoices and negative wrappers have been kept. There's such interesting material in this, and it gives such scope for more historical investigation and some really fascinating and quite funny things from time to time. I made a note, for instance, of the a photograph of the who was it? Let me just see where I made the note, if I may. Yes, the portrait of the Rani Sahib of Akalkot, for instance. The negatives and the proof prints have notes about retouching the veins of her hands to make her more attractive, and the shadows, and things like that. Fascinating details about the working practices of studios. And I just, before this opened, actually came across the portraits of the Maharaja of Bhavnagar. Now, he ordered 36 copies of each of 3 images, with a little note to say to be printed to fit his own silver frames. So these were obviously produced for distribution to dignitaries of one sort or another. And there are these sorts of details which really tell us a lot about how photography was used and why people went there. And that's from the top of society down to people who are simply taking passport photographs, for whatever purposes, one doesn't know. So there's all photographs have a certain elegiac quality, but these passport photographs just, they seem to open up a scope for social investigation, which I think would be, it's almost endless, the uses to which this material could be put for costume history, social history, photographic history. There's a whole range of areas, and I spent hours looking through this material, and there's hours more to do. And I have lots of things I'd love to know about the photographers, about the sitters, but there's the metadata in terms of the negative envelopes really does add to the value of this material. And everybody, I think, is to be congratulated both for the production of the work and for its preservation. So I'm going to stop at that point, just really to say how interesting and fascinating the collection is, and congratulations for preserving it.
Yeah, thank you, John. I'm so glad you mentioned the invoices and some of those other details, because I think that's something that folks don't understand when they're looking at the collection or looking at photography collection, sort of how we unpack the details of who the setters were, or when they came for a sitting, or under what conditions they came for a sitting, or what types of prints they wanted from the photographer. I have some images of the studio, but I wonder if Ajita and Ben might be willing to say a little bit about what the archive is, what the collection looks like today, what is preserved in that collection, and then how you're working with those materials to turn them into a digital collection that people who are unfamiliar with the studio, who are unfamiliar maybe with the history of Mumbai, or might know the history of Mumbai from a different perspective, how those folks can then make use of this collection and kind of gain entry into it. So I'm going to bring up some of those images, which you can talk about or not talk about. But I just love to hear you say more about what the collection looks like today, what sort of state it's in, and then how you and the team have been approaching the collection and turning it into a digital collection, or digital collections, plural.
So I guess in terms of process, if I can give you a little bit of what we actually do, and then Ajita perhaps can talk in terms of looking after the physical collection. I think that might be a sensible thing to do. So we have 2 copy stands with Canon cameras and macro lenses, taking photographs of the items. They're pretty much in order. You know, the family have really looked after them, so we can pretty much work chronologically through huge amounts of archive material. Yeah, you can see in the top right there an example of the filing of the photographs. Difficult circumstances in which to keep an archive. Mumbai isn't particularly a forgiving environment for pretty much anything that you'd want to preserve. Temperatures get very, very high. The studio doesn't have AC or any of the kind of environments that we would expect of a museum in Europe. But what it does do is, as we take items out and get ready to digitize them using the copy stands, we photograph them tethered, and that goes into Adobe Lightroom, where the photographs are cropped just so that we can just see the edges of the item itself. So it reminds us that we're looking at an item. It's not just a digital image, it's a physical thing that exists. And then once we've done that, that goes onto the cloud that UCLA have kindly provided for us. And those items are then rehoused into new envelopes and then put onto a new location on a shelf, which means that they're in a better position to be looked after. And I should just add that, you know, we with these 2 programs, we are closing in on around 60,000 assets to have been digitized. So that's prints, negatives, and paperwork. But as Ajita alluded to at the very start, she's got somewhere in the region of 600,000 items that need looking after. So we've got a long way to go. But what we have begun to show is absolutely most wonderful, as John highlighted. You know, the stories of the past, but also, you know, the social stories of the past. Some contextual information from letters and notes and invoices, and we would love a great deal more contextual information, because we know those descendants are out there. We know people understand a lot more about what we're looking at here. So being able to connect this collection to other information would be wonderful. And I guess Ajita is best placed to explain how the studio itself operates.
Thank you, Ben. You have given quite a bit of information as far as that goes. But as I said, we do lack dehumidifiers. There is a lot of humidity in this place. Being very close to the Arabian Sea, we have to think of looking after these cellulite negatives which get warped and sometimes stuck. And we lose out on the picture, or we lose out on the negative itself. And that is, you know, something that we need to look into, though we have our restraints. And that besides, what we are doing is we are still filing it the same way, though we are trying to find different methods of doing it and putting it into different jackets so that, you know, we can preserve it better. Now, going back to where we started was the 20th century. I'm a little surprised, and I wouldn't know if Mr. John can give us an input on that. But you see, the negatives were very beautiful. I mean, they have been kept and preserved very well. But somewhere in between, they're not very good. And maybe it was the material, maybe it was the chemicals, maybe they were not washed properly. I don't know who the staff was then, before my father took over. So those negatives are warped and they're stuck. And, you know, I could not retrieve anything, because when I see my interns come to me and say, "Ma'am, what do I do about this?" And I say, "We can't do anything about this." So that is how it goes. But Yes, I mean, we are still preserving our negatives and positives, and now, of course, digital. But in those days, up to 2014, we did have analog photography and we were taking pictures. So we are still doing that kind of thing. So, yes, as far as that is concerned, we are trying to preserve it in the best way possible. And of course, with the help of both EAP and MEAP, we are able to come this far. And I hope there will be much more to this and we can make it into a library so that people can use it, uh, not commercially, but to study from this because the photographs are beautiful. And anybody who is a photographer would really appreciate this kind of work, which has been done in the past. And yeah, that's how it is.
Thank you. John, I would love to know your thoughts, kind of picking up where Ajita left off. I would love to know your thoughts about what it's like to encounter a collection of photographs like this from the studio's perspective. Oftentimes when we have, sometimes we have photographers' collections, but sometimes we have family collections or family albums of photographs, and that's how we encounter them. What changes when we have a studio's collection and when we have some of these other documents and the paperwork, the invoices, the envelopes to go along with the photographs? How do they change? How do those objects and how does that framing kind of change the way we can approach or the way we can learn from these photographs?
Well, I suppose I'd say that the existence of that metadata in the form of invoices, names, is immense in terms of the value of it. I mean, many of the very early photographs from the studio are of quite distinguished people whose identities, a little bit of research would one would be able to identify them without too much trouble. In fact, several people who have photographed, even I recognize immediately. As time goes on and the studio is photographing what one might call a more demotic section of the population, people who are coming in for passports, that sort of thing. Without that information, this is lost history, really. I mean, it's interesting, of course, but it's anonymous. The fact that you have this identification of places, people, and dates is a huge potential for sort of crowdsourcing history of that sort. I can imagine the more popular this material. I mean, I see on the EAP site, it asks you if you can add information about images, but that is only ever going to bring in a tiny proportion of material. It's making the collections available in their home, in their place of origin, that is really going to spur on information research and is going to increase their value, increase the historical value of the material. So all that is just, and I don't know, I don't really know of any other collections in India. I'm sure there are archives of one sort or another that have survived. In general, Indian collections have not fared very well. But to have it looked after, the whole output of a studio together with all that data, I think may well be unique. I mean, I wouldn't like to say categorically, but I think it's a huge sort of potential to exploit historically particularly in its home environment. And I'm curious as to the there are film negatives, but are there glass negatives in the collection? I'd have thought the earlier material was probably on glass, and I've seen a few negatives which appear to be cracked, so presumably from glass. But I was curious as to how much of the collection is in the form of glass negatives rather than film. Because that does tend to survive rather better if it doesn't get broken.
We have a lot of glass negatives too. And that's in the size 8x10 or 10x12
Yeah,
also.
yeah,
And 4x6, 6x8. These are the sizes that we have. And they're kept away very well and they really look lovely.
yeah, yeah. I mean, some of those
Beautiful.
early studio pictures with that dramatic lighting, those rather Art Deco half circles and rectangles against which these very beautiful ladies are posed. There, and this is something else I wanted to ask you. Now, who was the photographer of those early images? Because this is the work of a very skillful, trained photographer. Now, is that
It was Sir Victor Sassoon who had gone in for, I mean, he was the one heading the whole thing. And then there was another person who was a Russian who was a photographer. And then it was, and because we had an outdoor photographer and an indoor photographer, so they were two different people. So they were both working for the studio and under Sir Victor Sassoon. So not much was known about them.
right? But it's very much a portrait studio, isn't it? I mean, the
Oh, yeah.
proportion of outdoor material is really quite small compared to the
Oh,
portrait.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. True. We are more into portraits, family portraits. We're more into corporate portraits, group pictures, a lot of those things.
And as for the conservation of the film material, I'm afraid that's really a little depressing. I think all one can do with that is rescue what one can in terms of copying it. It is, after all, an endangered archive, so that's really what you're doing. How much one would be able to do with films that are stuck together and irredeemably curled up? Probably very little, to be frank.
Not much,
Yeah, yeah.
much. Because then if you try to force yourself, the film will crack and it's not worth it.
And do you have issues with nitrate negatives? Are there nitrates in the collection, or have you
No,
not?
we don't have nitrate. We have generally most of them are celluloid and most of them are in 50%, I would say, were in good condition, 50% not so good. So maybe 20% damaged.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's how it goes. And if it's damaged, it's just gone. Unless we find a print, but then you have to identify who that person is because there is no number to it and there is nothing behind that print. So
Yeah.
all these excess prints which were done are also preserved on bromide
Well,
paper.
and of course they have a lot of information on them with instructions and cropping marks and this sort of thing. Yeah.
So no, we had these prints were taken out as rejects and not given to the client. And that's how we have these excessive prints, which are beautiful in itself. It's only there must be a little flaw here and there, which doesn't really matter. And it can be touched up with a brush, but they do not have a number behind. And if the negative is destroyed, we don't know who that person is. And how does one identify it? So we have many such where we can't identify them.
Yeah.
So that's the other part of the archive, which will be the toughest one, I believe.
Yes, I mean that's inevitable though. I mean, but given the amount of material that is identified and dated, I think it's a remarkable collection. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we do have one question from an attendee that sort of follows on this question about the glass plate negatives, and the question asks whether you're digitizing glass plate negatives or only positives, and then if you're working with negatives, could you explain the method for digitizing those materials and how you approach them? Do you use a black light, or what is the process for digitizing these different formats? I don't know if this is a good question for Ajita or for Ben here.
Do you want me to take that one, Ajita? Happy with that? So yes, lots of glass plate negatives, particularly the early negatives, probably up to around 1940. Basically glass plate, and then we begin to see celluloid taking over, particularly with some of the passport photographs or documentary photographs that people need for travel or whatever. So the way that we work is we have two copy stands. Each one has a camera with a tether that runs to a laptop. The laptop runs the Canon capture software plus Adobe Lightroom Classic. Adobe Lightroom Classic auto imports from a folder. So as we take a photograph with the camera, it goes into a folder on the computer. So with prints, obviously, that's just well lit from above. With negatives, that's lit from underneath. And then those appear in Adobe Lightroom Classic because we are able to watch a folder for new content. So those appear. And then we don't do too much to them. We crop them just to get rid of the remainder of whatever's around. And they may be maybe a small amount of adjustment if they've put it down and it's slightly twisted or something like that, so that it's at correct right angles as much as possible. And then those are exported to the cloud. So for MEAP, that's at 400 ppi. Long edge is 29.7 centimeters, which is A4. And that allows us to have a really high quality image. So that produces, say, from a print that is probably A6, that would produce something around about 100 megabyte file. So when we're producing, I think by the end of the MEAP project, which is, I think it's at the end of January, this coming January, we'll have produced somewhere in the region of 35 to 40,000 items, all around 100 meg, if not a little bit more, if the physical object is slightly larger. And at the same time, so we have two people working with the copy stands. We use one for negatives and one for print. And then we have somebody sitting behind them and they're working on the metadata. So effectively what happens is an envelope is taken off the shelf, the contents are removed, they are gently cleaned with a light brush if there's detritus on them. We then give the paper and the celluloid negative to each copy stand, and somebody else is putting in some of the metadata into a Google spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet is an MEAP spreadsheet, it's not our own, so that we have particular fields to complete. And each row represents an envelope. So the envelope, in some cases, I'm looking at my screen here because I've got it open as I'm going through a third batch of content that's come from India, and so I've got envelopes, some with 2 items, 3, 10, 6, 2, 4, 14, 10. In some cases, we have 70 items, particularly the Maharajas, who John alluded to, do like their prints. And the envelopes generally have all of the test prints. So my understanding, and Ajita can correct me, but is that the client would receive the test prints, they would scribble all over them and send them back saying yes, no, to what they wanted, and the order would be completed and sent on. Those test prints are the ones that survive and that we are copying along with the negatives. Yeah, so that's our process. It's reasonably manual. It's very good for the young people who are students who generally do the intern work to be able to care for these items and see the history of the city that they're in, which we particularly like. And my job, because it sounds like I don't do anything. But my job is just to check over that everything is correct and it's compliant with MEAP requirements. So I go through checking the metadata, as I said earlier, for spelling and other errors, and I'll check handwriting as well. That generally means I'm looking at going through envelopes at a time, and I am currently about a third of the way through batch 3. At the moment, and when we finish today, I will carry on for a couple of hours afterwards going through because actually I enjoy it. So I'm not going to say it's any kind of punishment because it genuinely isn't. It's absolutely fantastic. Hopefully that answers the what's the process question.
I think so. We have another question. This is sort of going back to the conversation that Ajita and John were having about the photographers of the studio. And this one is a question about the the outdoor photographs that appear in some of in the collection. So there are some photos that I've seen of factories and other spaces, and this person has asked about images of bridges and buildings that were not yet built. So Ajita, could you maybe talk a little bit about that division that you mentioned between the indoor photographer and the outdoor photographer, and how the outdoor spaces were photographed and how those commissions worked?
Sure. The thing was that when people came indoors for the photographs, they would have to go to the dressing room and dress up the way whatever was told to them, they would bring that, and we do that today too. And they would sort of dress up accordingly, and they would have their hair makeup and whatever, but no makeup on the face. So that was there right from day one. And when it went to the outdoor, we did families outdoor, we did photographing buildings, yes, some of them. Then there were railway stations, there were photographs of how they were building the tramway and how the roads. So there were all these kind of things. So maybe it was a casual picture that was taken when the photographer was out of the studio, and then he just took the picture because it was there, right there, So these kind of pictures were also done. Then we have a procession when the first telephone came into the city, and you have a huge telephone on a little truck which is going around the entire Balladisted, and that was photographed too. So we have these kind of interesting pictures that were taken by the person who was going outdoor and doing it. So, and they were all very keen photographers, I would say, because they had an eye for photography. And similarly, my father also did the same things, I mean, he had an eye for photography. So when he saw something that was catching his eye, he would just take a picture. And that is how we are. And here I do it too. So what was indoor can also be outdoor. So it's that way.
Can I just add that they have an awful amount of commercial clients as well. So we have photographs of shop fronts. In the MEAP Batch 3 collection, we've got Mercedes-Benz vehicles being photographed, and in the EAP, I have memories of Studebaker vehicles. So there's a lot of marketing type shots. There are also photographs of film stars, so silent film stars. So there's a silent film star called Sita who's photographed. And one thing that we haven't mentioned is that Ajita has some extraordinary bromide prints on the most beautiful paper of Sita. Production values, particularly early production values, were extraordinary, and they still have those objects. And they are real treasures, absolute real treasures, because they are truly irreplaceable. But yeah, a huge amount of commercial clients. And as we move to MEAP, we see a lot more of that. That can include not just products. So Pears Soap is a client. So Walter Thompson advertising agency I mentioned quite a few times. But we also see some photographs of things like contracts that are signed multiple times and things like that. So yeah, I mean, it's a real treasure trove, and obviously being in the business district and Fort, in particular Ballard Estate, means that they were right there for all of these different companies who needed their services.
Yeah, I know when I look at the MEAP collection, there's J. Walter Thompson is in there a lot. So we see them, Volkart Brothers, some other companies and organizations show up quite a lot. They were frequent clients, frequent customers. This gets to Abby also asked the question, saying, I know that Hamilton Studios did a lot of commercial work, and will that work for commercial clients also be digitized? And as far as I know, the team is just working through the envelopes as they come, not separating out the sort of personal photographs from the commercial photographs. It's all being digitized together. Ben, Ajita, I don't know if there have been any photographs that you have had to keep out of the digital collections, or if you've had to do any sort of review after you've seen the images to take them out.
Nothing has been taken out unless it is bad, negative, or positive, whatever. So it goes with the serial number, and that is how it is. Yes, commercials were done at that point of time, and later on, Dad took it up in 1970s. So commercials went on there, and then it was modeling, and then you have the famous Zeenat Aman and Persis Kambata and all these Bollywood people who started from Hamilton. So yes, that was when Dad took over the studio, and he had done so commercials. Yes, was part of this studio, and right now we are not doing that because there are many people who are doing that, so we don't need to get into that. But yes, commercials was very much Hamilton then, and any such thing, I mean, I would immediately know this is from Hamilton.
Yeah. This is another question about who and what is represented in the collection. It's a question about what types of occupational categories are represented in the collection. Do you see signs of different caste groups and other communities represented in the collection as well?
Many communities, like you had Parsis, you had Bhatiyas, you had Anglo-Indians, you had the Jews, you had many, many such things, and you have the gurus of everybody. So there's a lot, for instance, His Holiness the Dalai Lama was photographed by Dad, and that was the first time that he had opened his doors to photography and getting himself photographed. So my dad had the privilege of doing his photograph and his guru's photograph. So these were kind of things that, we have been open to. Not only that, we've done jewelry, we've done so many other things. We've done the Asiad medals. So there was lots of such things that also were done.
Yeah, thanks. I have a couple questions about what the archive of the studio looks like. One question asks, does the studio have a professionally organized archive of its photography-related collection, as well as other studio-related documents from the beginning of the studio? And a related question is, do you also have other materials related to the history of photography, say photography magazines, or published materials related to the practice of photography as part of the studio's collection?
Unfortunately, we lost quite a bit of material during the floods. Being the ground floor, we lost a lot of material then, so quite a bit of that was lost. And other than that, yes, we do have quite a bit of material which you can rely on, which you can go back to. Letters, we have memos, we have lots of things that are there, which is, I mean, I don't know where to start. So that's all I can say.
Lots of things in the collection. And my understanding is that that scholars do come and make use of the collection. Is that correct? You've had scholars and researchers visit and work with
We do have
materials.
scholars, researchers. We do have these people who come in and want certain photographs. They buy it off us and things like that. Yes, there is all those kind of things that happen. And yeah, we do share our things. We do share the knowledge. It's not that something we don't want to share. There is always room for all that.
This question, we're getting more and more questions keep coming in from the audience. So I'm going to try to group them, but also make sure that we get to most of them. This question is about the history of photography in some ways. Since you've talked about the films and the different types of glass plate negatives and the other materials on which the images were captured, do we know anything as well about the cameras and the lenses that were used to capture the photographs?
We used a lot of wooden cameras, and we still have one, which is dating back to 1921. The rest we had to sort of sell them off because they were getting bad, and we couldn't just look after so many things. So it had to be sold. And not only that, but we had Mamiya Flex, which was a twin lens reflex. We had Graflex, We had Hilba. Hilba was my dad's favorite monorail. And Linoff, of course, I still have, which I cannot just get rid of. So we had that. We had Hasselblad. We have worked on any camera and every camera that you can mention. So there's a list of cameras that I could tell you that we had. Rolleiflex and Mamiaflex and Leica and the list that goes there, Graflex.
Yeah. Is any of that information recorded in the metadata for the collection as things are being digitized, or is it too
No, I don't
difficult to
think so.
tell which equipment is used? Yeah.
No, I don't think so. Because generally it was the wooden camera that was used, and then my dad got in the Amagon lens, which was only used for portraits, which was a beautiful soft lens. And yes, we had that. And let me tell you one more thing that we never used. We didn't have a shutter release, so we had to use our hand and just count the seconds. And that was how it, and we had to tell this person who was sitting on the other side, the client, steady, and that you had to be steady. You know, it was really funny. You know, I mean, now looking at things, it's so much faster.
Yeah. I get one question about the anecdote that you shared at the beginning about Dr. Ambedkar visiting the studio and being photographed. Do you know how that seemingly casual personal photograph went on to become the official portrait of Dr. Ambedkar that is now, hanging on walls and shown everywhere?
That he had come right here. Dr. Ambedkar had come here. His wife also came during my time. And, Dad was invited at that point of time. This was in 1955, if I mistake not. And he said, we have to do a prestigious photograph. Will you be able to do it? And Dad took up the challenge. He never used to give that up. So he took up that challenge. So he came here and he took the photograph of Dr. Ambedkar, and he made him pose and whatever. And then we took that picture, and then the government liked it so much, they said, please give us this negative. And of course, he gave it off at that point of time, because at that time there was nothing like archiving, and there was nothing like something was very valuable. It wasn't so valuable.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions about. So one question that maybe a short answer, are there any photographs of archaeological sites in the collection? Is that something that the studio was involved in photographing?
No.
And what about photographs from outside of Bombay, say in Pune or neighboring cities?
My dad has covered the whole of Gujarat, Orissa, South India, some parts. So yes, we do have a few out of Bombay, as he was the official photographer for Gujarat and Bombay State then. It's called Bombay and Gujarat State.
There's also a few examples of where the outdoor photographer went to Maharaja events where somebody's going along in a crowd with a moving in the back of a moving car. So those kind of things also feature as well, that look like public celebrations. So there's a few of those. There's also in the EAP some night photography of a hunt for a tiger. So that's in there somewhere. I remember that.
Or we also have some procession of some marriage that took place. I think it was Gwalior. So we do have that too. And of course, Dad had photography done at the Gateway of India when Queen Elizabeth was here. So he had done some pictures, of course, as a young person and an enthusiast. He had done it from far away, and with some of these pictures are on the Instagram. So that's how it was.
Yeah. So Priyanka Boss, John, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that one of the, of course, there's a big series from Gwalior, isn't there, of some official event. But what I was going to, actually, it just brought it to mind. There's a number of photographs of tigers at night. Now, were those taken with a tripwire and a flash gun or something? They're very close to the animals in question, of tigers and leopards. And I was rather curious as to how they were taken.
Well, we had a Callard flash gun, so I don't know if they used that. a colored flash gun, as I would describe it, was they had a bulb which would just go poof, and that was it. The bulb is gone and the flash is gone. And
Yes,
so they,
I was wondering what would have triggered those because they're dangerously close to the animals themselves. That's what I was interested in. It's a very minor point. It's not.
Yeah. So you have a question from Priyanka Basu who asks about the photographs of dancers and performers from the early 20th century in the collection and wonders if the studio is working with any performance scholars to identify the performers or whether there are any efforts to do some of that work to build out the metadata to add some more identification information to some of these images that are in the collection.
we are not working as of now with any performers. But yes, in those days, we had some troops who would come in for their photographs. Then they would sort of, there were actors, there was some band that had been photographed, if I mistake not. And then, of course, we have the Mehtas who were photographs with the violin, and Mehli Mehta was photographed here, and all his pictures were done here. So we did have those in the past, and that took a few, but then not now.
I should also say that Priyanka also sends congratulations on getting these projects done.
Thank you.
They visited the studio early on in the project and now are very happy to see it get to this
Thank you.
stage. We have one question about the sort of studio's functions today, and I wanted to also ask you, since you mentioned switching to digital photography, maybe this is a question for everyone on the panel. And it has to do with the fact that part of the reason we have this collection, we're able to access it now, is because we had physical objects that have been preserved and that have remained over time. Now, a lot of photographers and a lot of photography has switched to digital, both in the way that formal photographers work, but also the way that a lot of us casually take photos with our phones and with other digital tools. I guess I have a two-part question. What is the studio? How has the studio changed its archival practices now that it has transitioned to digital photography, and how are those digital photographs now being preserved and captured for the future? And then maybe this is for more for Ben and John, thinking about the work of archiving and curating photograph collections. What can or should we all do with digital photographs as we think about the photographic legacy of the current day being available to folks who might be doing research in the future? How do we deal with this digital photography in our current moment?
As of now, we have raw files, which we are putting it on the hard disk and on cloud also. So that's how we are preserving that bit. But hopefully it should work that way. And I also make a print. I make a correct print, and I put it in the envelope, which has the number of the person, so that in case I lose the raw file or the file which is digitized, I still have the print which I can copy and I can give a photograph.
Yeah,
So thinking that way.
I like that.
I guess in a kind of world of mass observation as we have now, where we're all being photographed all the time, we kind of lose that exclusivity that the photo once had. I think the studio, I mean, I've always loved the idea of bringing that big old Kodak box camera and that huge lens that's on the front of it back to life. I'd love my photograph taken with that. That would feel super special. But with the digital files, I guess we're getting to a point now where there's a lot of free tools out there, like open source software tools that are probably more accessible to non-Western countries. I don't know whether I can mention brand names, but you know, things like collection management software or digital asset management software that's free and open source. that will act as a web interface and allow people to organize their digital collections. I think there's a lot of work to do in that space, you know, to make those things more available in places like India. But I think that can do a lot of the heavy lifting for people, because processes can be automated if we can get those processes started. But I think you're right, you know, there's this kind of sense that because we can do it immediately now, we don't need to look after it quite so much. But, you know, I would ask the audience, you know, how many of them have got the photos that they took on their phone from 10 years ago? You know, probably not. You know, I'm somebody who takes a lot of care about this sort of stuff, and I still regret not putting stuff onto the cloud that is on a hard drive that sits on my desk at work but no longer works. One day someone will give me the solution to getting maybe 1,000 images of my life off that hard drive. So yeah, I would suggest that open source software and some of the stuff that's happening in that world, particularly, you know, the way that AI helps us with coding these days, that is moving at such a wonderful pace that that those tools will become available that were previously the domain of very expensive software platforms. So hopefully people will be able to adopt some of that technology.
Yeah, since we have a question.
Can I say I take an utterly despondent view of preservation? The sheer volume of photographs. If you look up how many photographs are uploaded to Flickr every day, how many million, A, very few of them are looked at. B, the forward migration of this data, I think, presents huge problems. Having been a curator, I sort of think of myself as fairly organized. The organization of digital data is a nightmare. My analog photographs, which are well processed, I can be reasonably competent that they'll still be there in 500 years' time. What percentage of digital data will be around in that time? I've no idea. The other problem is there's so much of the stuff that we don't look at photographs anymore. The nature of photography has changed fundamentally, I think. But I'm not going to go on. I can go on about this for a long time, but I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, I think I was going to tie in some of Ben's comments to this question that we have about the interns and the students who are coming in to work on this project. And maybe you could say a little bit about how you recruit them and how you train them and what their interests are. And perhaps you could maybe reflect on whether doing some of this work with the collection, working on a digitization project, is maybe changing the way that they name files or label files or store files or think about the digital preservation or long-term digital viability of some of the materials that they're creating in their lives, either as photographers or just as humans.
Well, I'll have to ask them that. Because I haven't asked them that. I guess over the course of the two projects, we've had somewhere north of 30 interns. Some of them are there for a month. It's a great experience for them, and they see it as a project on which to learn. Some we have, like Minnie, who's there at the moment, who is really committed. I mean, Minnie's been there for now a couple of years. We've had a couple of people in the past like that as well, and that was a blessing in the EAP project, because that happened either side of COVID. So we got going. We did our training. I went to India. I set up all the equipment. We got the equipment into India, which was a bit of a mission, but we set up in India. Got everything going. We did our training, and then I continued to do training from the UK when it's needed. But with people like Minnie, they really know their stuff. You know, they're digital natives. These young people, I think, you know, they really understand how systems work, and they get their head around the need for naming conventions, the need for structured data, very, very quickly. The difference between free text as metadata, the difference between structured metadata as well. British Library gave us a structured taxonomy. We've got the same from University of California Library as well that we work with. So they understand the need to do that. Whether they translate that into their own lives, I don't know. I tried desperately to translate this into my own life as well. And John's right, you know, the massive digital data is just perhaps too overwhelming and ultimately exhausting to want to deal with, other than from a curation perspective, picking the real quality images out and doing something proper with them, perhaps printing them, as Ajita said. But yeah, it's great. It really is. Their enthusiasm and energy is really important to the project. They really appreciate the fact that they get paid to do something that perhaps might be seen as volunteer type work in some rounds. But we take them seriously. You know, they've got to the point where they raise questions. They're very deferential. And actually they now quite happily send me a WhatsApp message saying, can I have a word? We've got a question, which is fantastic. You know, I don't want them to stand on ceremony at all. I want the project to succeed, but I want them to succeed as well. We this year we had Minnie applied for a British Library internship, which she didn't get, but she was confident enough to not only apply for it, but to do so without me or Ajita having a look at her application. She just went for it, which was wonderful. And then we have students from NID who come along, and perhaps they're there for maybe 6 weeks, whatever they can spare out of their term time. They're thinking about their own projects, but they're also thinking about this kind of activity and whether it's the kind of activity that perhaps is unique in India because Hamilton is unique, or perhaps because they should be out there looking for the next opportunities, knowing that they can do something too. So my fingers are crossed, and success will be sort of defined by whether some of these young people go on and do good quality stuff in museum, gallery, library, archive space. And we can make those kind of changes at a kind of infrastructure level in India, just because they want it to happen. So I guess that's my sort of my view of working with the young people. It's been a real blessing.
That's wonderful. We have just a couple of minutes, so I'm going to throw out one final question for all of our panelists. Oh, and I guess it might time out at the end, so somebody might get cut off. I'm very sorry. But this question is, what is one thing that you hope viewers or researchers will take away from the collection? And I'll just let each of you answer quickly.
I would say a lot of study work, a lot of beautiful study work. And whoever takes this on is really going to benefit from there. Some of my interns have gone abroad and they've studied there and they've come back and they've really thanked me for it. And they take letters from me to sort of go wherever they have to go. And, you know, it's really been terrific for them. Minnie too had taken a letter and from me, and she says, may I join? I said, go ahead.
Fantastic.
Do you want to go first, John?
Oh, well, yes, I'll just very briefly say that, you know, I've only really introduced myself to the collection in the last few days in preparation for this, and it's just an intriguing, well, not so hidden, but an intriguing treasure that can open out for exploration in so many areas. So making it digitally available is, I mean, despite my words about digitization, I use it myself, and of course everybody it's just I'm aware, but I think I will stop there because I'm external to the project, but I've very much enjoyed learning about the collection, and I hope it expands, continues to expand.
Well, I guess from my point of view, it's context. I want these collections to connect to the families that are out there now living their lives. I want them to be able to understand that their heritage has been preserved and that it's available, thanks to me, thanks to Ajita, thanks to MEAP. And I want that knowledge to be there and available for people, and you know, free open source systems, having open libraries like UCLA's libraries is the way forward. So more of that, please. And you know, I do hope there are other studio archives around the world just like Ajita's archive, that could do with a little bit of the Modern Endangered Endangered Archive Program treatment. So hopefully this has been a little bit inspirational for them.
Well, thank you. That's a fantastic note to end on. Thank you to our panelists for joining us for this conversation and for sharing their expertise and their experiences working with this collection. Thank you to our colleagues at the British Library for organizing it, Petra and Jody, and Sam for offering introductory remarks. And everyone, please sign up for our email newsletters, stay in touch with us, and hopefully we'll see you at our next webinar event.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.